Thank you everyone for being here and for taking on the task to go through this webinar with us on such important topics. Let's go ahead and get the next slide. I'm going to do a little bit of some house cleaning. Again, thank you for being here. We want you all guys to know that we do have simultaneous translation into Spanish. If you look at the screen, then you will be able to see on the bottom of your screen, you'll see an interpretation button. Please choose the language that you wish to hear the interpretation in, and we'll be simultaneous, so it's at the same time as our webinar. Next slide. We are going to be recording today's events. All participants are going to be muted and the cameras will be turned off. Please make sure that your computer speakers are turned on and up to hear today's presentation. If you're having any kind of technical issues, please do send a message to the Hispanic and Latino Behavioral Health Center of Excellence on the chat box. We'll be sure to stay on top of that and be looking out for anything. If you have any question for our presenters, we ask that you use the question and answer tab on the toolbar and type your question in and hit send. We can address questions to the presenter at the appropriate time during today's presentation or at the conclusion of the presentation. We are needing people's evaluations. So once the webinar is complete today, please do complete your evaluation. I'm going to be sending out the link box, the link to the evaluation through the chat box. And at the end of the presentation, you'll also have the opportunity to scan the QR code and be able to complete it. Certificates will be provided of attendance once the completion of the evaluation has been done. Thank you. The Hispanic and Latino Behavioral Health Center of Excellence has the mission to advance and support the sustainability of behavioral health equity by promoting community-driven, culturally grounded, and person-centered intervention, multiple pathways of recovery, and recovery supports for diverse Hispanic and Latine communities. The Hispanic and Latino Behavioral Health Center of Excellence recognizes the complexities associated with gender and ethnic identification, as well as the right of all individuals to self-identify. The center uses the term Latine with the intention of both facilitating a fluent reading and pronunciation and supporting an inclusive and respectful language. Latine is a gender-neutral form of the word Latino that uses the letter E at the end, an idea native to the Spanish language. Today, our presenter is Michelle Evans, Doctor in Social Work. Dr. Michelle Evans is a licensed clinical social worker and licensed sex offender treatment provider and evaluator. She has worked primarily with the Latino population throughout her career as a child welfare specialist and forensic evaluator and treatment provider. She is currently the Chief Executive Officer for Elgin Mental Health Center in Elgin, Illinois, a state forensic psychiatric hospital. She is in a private practice at Nickerson and Associates, PC, as a bilingual therapist where she treats adults and adolescents with mental health issues, substance abuse issues, and sex addictions. She also teaches on these topics at Aurora University and Indiana Wesleyan University. Previously, she was the Assistant Dean for Health Professions and Public Service at Wabaunsee Community College, and she has held other positions within psychiatric hospitals. Throughout her career, she has worked to increase equity, justice, and cultural awareness in these institutions. Michelle Evans earned a Doctor of Social Work and a Master of Social Work degree from Aurora University in Illinois. Michelle, without further ado, please get us started on your topic.
All right. Hello, everybody. So I'm actually going to jump back one, only because I want to give you a little context. So first of all, as we're starting here, I want to invite you to kind of relax. You know, I know many of you are probably still working. It's getting toward the end of the day. You're trying to finish up a couple of more emails. And I always, whenever we have an opportunity to grow, to gain knowledge, I always like to just take a moment to think about that and just the opportunity and privilege to be able to share information. So I'm sitting here with my tea, and I really am looking forward to just talking to you today about some of the things that I've learned. So a moment ago, through my biography there, it was mentioned that I am in the state of Illinois. I'm a licensed sex offender treatment provider and evaluator. And so today's topic, as we're talking about teenage dating violence, it is something that I've worked in both because I work with individuals who have harmed someone through sexual offense or through sexual behavior. But also, we find that about 95% of the individuals who harm individuals through not just sexual offense, but also dating violence and intimate partner violence also have suffered abuse emotionally, physically, or sexually themselves. And so I've worked with the individuals who harm, who participate in intimate partner violence, but I also work with many of the victims as well, who are often on the other side within these same families, or connected in some way, or still in the relationship. You know, we like to think that if, someone harms someone else, well, instantly we separate them, they never see each other again. But we know the most common violence are people that we know. The majority of sexual offenses, both the ones that are criminally charged and the ones that occur and are never reported, the vast majority happen with somebody that we know. And so, therefore, as we're talking about this topic, I want to present that all of us know someone that's been impacted by both physical violence or sexual violence. Often I found as I started working in this field, both working in my history of just, general counseling, working with individuals, often it's very, very difficult for victims to say, I've been harmed. And it's also very difficult for individuals who have harmed to say, I've harmed someone else. And so in today's presentation, we're going to talk about a lot of the nuances within that and how, as someone who, I assume I saw many of you are working with individuals, working with clients who may have suffered teenage dating violence or other intimate partner violence. As we talk about the individuals who harm and that are victims of this, I hope that we can kind of keep aware of that I guarantee right now you are working with clients who aren't mentioning the violence that they're experiencing, either A, because they haven't identified it. They've identified it. This is just what happens in relationships. Or number two, the opening hasn't come up where they feel comfortable enough to share. And that's kind of where we're working today, is to develop an awareness. So as we see things, we can start to talk to our clients and ask the questions that might bring this to their attention. All right. So the first thing that we need to know, especially, is looking at what is teenage dating violence? All right. So I always like to tell you about my clients, make it relatable. So once upon a time, I'm sitting with a client who I've now seen for 12 years. And so I know him very, very well, but he was referred to me initially because he was participating. He was having relationships with individuals a little too young for him. And so he was just on the age. So we're looking at like 19, 20 years old. So, almost within that teenage, but just up. And he was dating some individuals who were more toward, definitely the 17, 18-year-old age. And as I talked to him, now initially he did not present that he was anything other than a gentleman in his relationships. He would talk about, yeah, we went out to dinner. Yeah, we did this, and generally talk about how he had fun with the person, who he was dating, which was, at this point, healthy relationship. He was like 20, she was like 18, somewhere around that age. Nothing obvious, in terms of as I'm listening to him every week. However, then the relationship started to go sour, and it started with he came in and he told me, well, his girlfriend had made him mad that week. I'm like, well, what had gone on? And basically the girlfriend wanted to spend additional time with some of her friends who she hadn't seen in a while. She wanted to go out, and what the client said to me, which all of a sudden brought everything to mind was because I always talk to him about healthy boundaries. We love healthy boundaries in therapy. And he said, she's violating my boundaries because my boundary is that if I send someone a text, they need to respond. My healthy boundary, he says, is that, in a healthy relationship, if I want to hang out, we hang out. And so, Dr. Evans, she's violating my boundary, by not deciding to spend time with me and instead deciding to spend time with friends. So hopefully most of you can see that, oh, that's not healthy boundaries. And so I, of course, attempted to explain that. I'm like, no, that's not what boundaries mean. Boundaries, you can't control someone else with your healthy boundaries. That's not really how they work there. And he was just, just overwhelmed by this thought. Luckily, we had a very, very good rapport at this point. So we started to explore it. And what I ended up doing was pulling out, they're all over the internet. So I Googled real quick, what is domestic violence? And I pulled out a list, of if you are experiencing these things, you may be in a violent relationship. And so pulled it up on my computer, turned it around toward him, had him read, which, and they were all things like, if your partner does, controls what you do, or if your partner doesn't let you see other people. And this guy, he was really, like I said, he's been with me a long time, still, this was years ago, but really trying to do better in his life. And so all of a sudden he started reading this and he's like, oh, because up until that point, he did not know the behaviors of being controlling, preventing your partner from seeing people they want to see, demanding responses, telling your partner what they should do and being angry when they decide to do something else. He didn't see that as violence. He actually saw that as normal. And if we go back to why, we look at his own experiences of relationships. And we're going to get into this today. Every relationship, every intimate partner relationship that he'd seen, including his parents, including grandparents, including even friends' parents that he could, that he remembered well enough, all had this element of control in them. And so when I started telling him that, no, you can't control others, he was completely surprised. He's like, I didn't know this. And so thus we get back to this slide here of what is dating violence? And that ultimate basis of we need to understand what it is, in the context of the relationships that we've had. But also, often our clients don't know that there is dating violence, especially our teenagers who are still trying out this dating thing. Often they don't understand that it's dating violence because many of them, if they have a high ACEs score, the adverse childhood experiences, which is an excellent evaluation that I use with a lot of my clients. If they have a high ACEs score, they've gone through a lot of violence themselves and abuse. They likely are in a place where they don't know what healthy looks like. All right. So for us, teenage dating violence encompasses physical, emotional, verbal, and digital abuse, which is a new one, within romantic relationships among adolescents. So that's the definition we're using for today. It affects a lot of teenagers, and there's a lot of consequences on mental health, academic performance, and future relationship patterns. Remember, our teenagers. So if any of you have little kids, how do kids learn things? All right. Any of you have little boys? I have two. Well, they're now big boys. They're now adults, but two boys that if we saw something, a car that fell off the road because it was snowing, a car that got in an accident, they'd go home with their Hot Wheels and they're crashing them and, falling off the bridge or whatever, because children learn through doing, through play. And it's very recognizable for children under 10. We go, yeah, children learn through play, of course. Little boys are crashing cars because that's what they see, because they're working on understanding it. However, our teenage children aren't much different. Teenage children, they are seeing, and believe me, the majority of your teenagers, and I'm sorry to break this to you if you don't know yet, if you have children who are 10, 11, 12 years old, they most likely have come into contact with some sort of pornography online. So those of us, I'm Gen X. We didn't expect that because we didn't grow up with that kind of internet. So they're seeing that stuff, they're talking about it, they're seeing parents, they're seeing friends' relationships, and they're seeing what relationships do. So as they move into being teenagers, they start to repeat what they've seen. How do you be in a relationship? They're looking at their friends, how their friends are in relationships, and that's what they start repeating. Fantastic when it's healthy, fantastic when they've seen healthy boundaries, not so great when they've seen unhealthy boundaries. And again, they learn through play, which in this case is our young teenagers dating and repeating the things that they've seen. And so one of the things, now that's just all teens in general. So research is showing, and I have some references down there, that it's also prevalent within our Hispanic and Latinx communities and our adolescents. And I'm going to tell you why, especially if we're talking about immigrant populations, why sometimes it can spark a little bit. There we go. Oops, got to get to my next one. There we go. So a little bit more on our definition here. It is considered an ACE, an adverse childhood experience, because obviously these are children who are experiencing this violent relationship from a close partner, close friend in childhood. It can take place person online, through technology. In other words, I'm talking about the social media, WhatsApp, those sort of things. And it's a type of intimate partner violence. So we got, IPV, and then underneath we have the specialty in terms of our teenagers. We have here physical violence. Obviously, this is the usual that we see: hitting, kicking, using other physical force. Sexual violence is one that we see that is probably, from what I've seen, one of the most underreported forms of violence, because often as we look at teenagers, the parents, the adults in their lives, are telling them you shouldn't have sexual activity to begin with. And so when they're growing up in a sexualized world where they have access to the internet, where their sexual behavior, sexual terms, just scrolling through TikTok, et cetera, they're seeing sexualized individuals who, and so they're walking around and practicing through play. They're doing the same thing, so very, very normal. However, when it goes wrong, we have a context of these are things that we don't talk about in our family. And so as we think about family values and the ability to talk about sexual things safely, that can also impact sexual violence if, first of all, we're helping our teenagers know how to say no, but also if we're helping them recover, and that if something does go wrong that makes them feel uncomfortable, that they can share. We want our children and our adolescents to feel that if someone touches them and it makes them feel uncomfortable, even if it's just, what, that teacher put their hand on my shoulder today and I didn't like how that felt. Even if it's something as slight as that, we want to develop relationships with both our children, teenagers, and our clients, that I'm a safe place. If anyone ever, including, and I've said this even to many of my clients, if I make you feel uncomfortable because of some things I'm asking, emotional boundaries, please let me know, so then we can discuss it and we can make sure that you feel safe. And so helping children set those boundaries, even in the therapeutic relationship or wherever you are working, in terms of this is how we are here. If anyone feels uncomfortable, they can say, I feel uncomfortable, and they will be heard. That is very, very important to developing a culture where if something does happen that makes the adolescent feel uncomfortable now in a teenage dating relationship, they can say, hey, you know what? I probably shouldn't have been doing this, but it got out of hand, and it ended up being something I didn't feel good with, so we're first starting just setting that room. So, all right. I see in the chat there's a request for the website. I got to tell you, I don't remember. There was a question in the chat, just if I can share what I showed my client in terms of domestic violence. I got to tell you, I Googled domestic violence and then probably whatever came up first. So there are, and at the end of this presentation, I have a whole bunch of resources that are really great websites that do have information on both domestic violence, intimate partner violence, and teenage dating violence. So I'll share those at the end. But yeah, at that point, I just Googled something and it looked like what I was looking for. Psychological aggression. And so with psychological aggression, we're looking at the use of verbal and nonverbal communication with the intent to harm a partner mentally or emotionally and exert control over the partner. So this is manipulation. So something I tell all of my clients is, if you cannot say no, then you cannot say yes. Wait, I got that backwards. All right, let me switch that. If you can't say yes, then you can't say no. All right. So I'll give you the example. So let's say, okay, one of my other positions is I'm the CEO of a large hospital. If I walk around with a plate of cookies, something so basic, and I'm like, hey, do you want a plate of cookies? Well, guess what? I understand the power of my position. I'm offering a plate of cookies, something that is very low risk if you take a cookie and throw it out. Nobody tells me no. If I say, hey, I made these cookies, I'd love you to have one, people are going to take my cookie. But in reality, I know that through the power of my position, they can't say no. They have to take a cookie. Why? We all know the social etiquette. If someone's offering you something, you take it, and they don't have to eat it. I don't stand over there and make sure they're eating my cookie, so low risk. But I also know they can't tell me no. So in reality, when they choose that cookie, they're not actually saying yes. It's not a clear and, and completely clean yes, because I know they can't say no, because of the power differential, and just, hey, low risk. She's offering a cookie. Even if I'm not a cookie person, I'm just going to take one and stand here and thank her and say, this is great. All right. So that's a really simple, relatively dumb example. Now we turn it into something, in terms of the, hey, we're going to go out on a date. Oh, I'm not really interested, you know. And then if somebody has something threatening, well, if you don't go on a date with me, I'm just going to tell everybody you had sex with me, you know, or that you wanted to date me and I told you no. And so all of a sudden the person can't say no, so they can't actually say yes. Often many of our teenagers, they get this, they don't understand that. And especially some of our boys, because I want to highlight that teenage dating violence can also happen with our boys. Often, as we know, in general, society, puts boys in the situation that, that you should want sex all the time. And if there is any sexual activity, you should be, jumping at that. That's the assumption. In reality, when we interview boys, when we talk to them about their goals, that's not necessarily the case. But often boys don't have a voice because of cultural norms, and especially when we talk about machismo, which we'll talk about in a second, as we talk about Hispanic and Latina values of that machismo. The bad, toxic machismo is the, hey, you're powerful. You should want to be a sexual being. That's part of it, which means we're not giving our boys the opportunity to say, no, I'm not interested, which is also a form of psychological aggression. If we have a female individual saying, hey, why don't you want to do this? What, are you not manly enough? Then again, they're not able to say no. So it's not a clean yes. And often our clients, our teenagers, and many of our adults don't really understand how that in particular works. And so some of our work in helping our clients is giving them that ability to say no. And I know we're doing a ton of work in the elementary schools, to be able to teach children, about good touch, bad touch. But then we move into the adolescent world where TikTok isn't in agreement with us. TikTok's not saying that, yeah, it's cool to say, hey, these are my boundaries. I'm not interested right now. That's okay in a kind and healthy way. All right. Lastly is stalking. Right now, I've mentioned the internet quite a bit. And so internet stalking is rampant. Now, I always recommend, when I'm talking to students, I usually recommend to them at some point to Google themselves, because if they're going to be applying for jobs, et cetera, they should know what employers see on the internet about themselves. We all know teenagers are also looking for each other online, watching Facebook, watching, the TikTok shares, watching all of the different things, and they're in a lot of groups. And so individuals can stalk each other through the use of our internet. It is just way too easy through all of our social media. And I say new like it hasn't been around for 15 years at this point, but hey, um, and so, but it can also be following. So I have an example of this. I just was working with a client the other day as well, and again, this one is somebody who was participating in the harm, whose girlfriend said, hey, I'm not interested. This relationship isn't working. And so he was very distraught, very stressed. And so, the day after this happened, what did he do? He went driving around her neighborhood with the hopes of seeing her. Now, is he going to jump out and beat her up or jump out and do something to her? No. However, if you're somebody who just broke up with your partner and you see them driving around your house, that's intimidation. Now, when, of course, my client, again, didn't see that way, because he's in a position of when a girlfriend just broke up with him, who he really cared for, he's in a position, he's in pain. And so therefore he's just saying, I just need to see her. I just wanted to see like that she's physically existing because she, isn't talking to me anymore. And so we have those just, kind of impulsive behaviors. And so one of the things that he and I really worked on here was that empathy, of having empathy of what it might be to see someone that you just broke up with. What might it be to see him driving around your neighborhood? What kind of feelings come up with that? you know? And similarly, so working with one of my females who had experienced this exact same behavior, it was talking to her about, okay, you know what, you broke up with somebody, and then you see them staring at you as you walk down the hall, with an intense stare. What can you do and how do you talk about this? And so a lot of what we're doing as we look at definitions is teaching. This is a prime place, basic definitions of teaching our children and our adolescents, what is this? What is violence? What is manipulation? What's psychological abuse? And how can you identify it and then report it to make sure that you are safe? Lastly, in this, I want to talk, it's a form of both sexual violence and the psychological aggression, which is using information and sharing it to others on social media. And so this is also a huge form of teenage violence, teenage dating violence, which often as an adult, sometimes our children are in, our teenagers are in these, social apps, and we're not necessarily able to watch depending on what they're doing and who they're connected to. And so therefore we've had multiple individuals who have sexted pictures of themselves. So we have young teens who are taking pictures of themselves, sharing it with their boyfriend because they love their boyfriend, and then they break up. And let's pretend in this case the female tells the male, I don't want to date you anymore, and then that male sharing the pictures to others, including, and I've worked with individuals who shared it to others, but then also those others shared it to their girlfriend, and we continue, it keeps getting shared until it's all over school now, and that's a form of psychological aggression and dating violence. Because often in this case you have, maybe a boyfriend that's like, I shared it to two friends, you know, but those two friends shared it to two friends, etc., got posted online. And now we have a victim who was not just harmed by her ex-boyfriend, but now we have the issue of, managing what's happening in the school. And within the school, how do we control just the harm, And we know that individuals who, are teenagers who have their pictures posted online of either, not well clad, we'll say that, not wearing clothes. We know that that kind of harm, can both cause a lot of things I'm going to talk about here in a minute, just academic harm and social harm, because our teenagers have a lot of opinions on that. So that's the overall general overview of what we're looking at just in terms of teenagers in general and how it might come up in some of our therapeutic interactions. Obviously, for those of you working in schools and other places where you are coming into contact with teens, through rapport, obviously just through listening about how they see relationships and what they understand to be healthy behavior, we often get a sense as to their beliefs and understanding as to what is healthy and what is unhealthy. And our job is really just to help them see, hey, we talk about healthy boundaries. How's that, how's that coming to play? You told me you didn't want to go out last night, but you felt pressured. Tell me more about that. And so that's really, as therapists, counselors, school personnel, or wherever you are, that's really where our opportunity lies. So I want to talk about how our culture impacts this. So as we look at culturally sensitive therapy, and looking at the unique values, beliefs, and experiences of these individuals, we're looking at the factors of acculturation, gender, immigrant status, sorry, read it wrong. Immigrant status influences the rates of dating violence within this demographic. Acculturation levels can impact relationship dynamics, which can influence the occurrence of dating violence. And I want to point this out, not because any of those things are bad. They're processes, they're natural processes that are great, However, often if we're working with an individual, let's say we're working with a teenager who has very traditional parents, maybe do not believe this is a female. Let's talk about my 16-year-old. I have a 16-year-old client, and her parents are very traditional, grew up in Mexico. Perhaps they've been here, maybe they've been here 15 years, but still have very, very traditional values and don't believe their daughter should be dating. And now their daughter is dating, on the sly. And we, the counselor, or, the support person in her life, find out that she has been a victim of violence. it's very, very difficult to help that individual talk about it because instantly it's I wasn't supposed to be dating. My parents will never forgive me. And a lot of that shame, a lot of victims bring shame upon themselves. And our teenagers, they don't have a lot of options. If all of a sudden, mom and dad say, hey, you know what? We told you not to date. You're locked in. You're locked down. You're not leaving. You know, we see that natural adolescent behaviors, you know, aren't having that support to kind of learn from these experiences, learn and grow. Instead, it's just okay, no more dating, which might be necessary. Every situation's a little bit different, and so our job as the support person, whoever you are, is to help that teenager navigate that dynamic so that they can keep themselves safe. As we're looking gender, of course, we know in our Hispanic and Latin communities, we generally, and anytime I talk about cultural values or norms, it is generally, because there are always individual people who do not follow the norms. But, so just, I always want to clarify that because it is not to go back to your client and this is I heard that this is how you are. No, that's not how it is. So we're speaking in generalities. And so unique values, and I have a group of adolescent boys, and when I talk to them and ask them, okay, do your parents let you date? Generally, those over 16, not a problem. Most of them are, no matter what their, what their background. When I ask the girls the exact same thing, it's a mix. You know, some of them 16 and up can date, but many of them, their parents are like, no, I'm not supposed to be dating. My parents don't want me to date. They want me to focus on school. They want me to do other things. And so that dynamic there, as we're looking at helping the individual develop healthy boundaries in a relationship, that can complicate it. Because sometimes, and this is actually across the board with males and females, and when we talk about LGBT, other concerns, that's even another story. But often when we're talking, parents generally aren't giving kids healthy sexual education. They're leaving it to the schools, which means, so again, one day this hit me. In our culture is highly sexualized. If you're living in the United States, at least I can speak to that. We're highly sexualized, but it's the one topic we really, really struggle to talk to our kids about. And now, if you're a support person, therapist, counselor, school personnel, the parents are essentially trusting you to educate the children on healthy sexuality for the most part, grand majority of families, and after 20 years of working with families, I found this disappointingly consistent. And so therefore, we have to help the teenagers both identify what are your values, what are the values of your family, and what are healthy boundaries. And let's talk about those healthy boundaries that can keep you safe, but we also need to help our client integrate, what does that mean for the values that your family has? What does that mean for your individual values? Because we know that values, all families do not have one value. Often there are multiple different values within a family that then you mix them together, that becomes the family, kind of the family value right there. And so some of that's just helping our clients open up that conversation, but understanding, as I work with a group of adult men as well, that this isn't the same. The culture is not the same when you have a acculturated family, multi-level acculturated family. All right. So of course, gender has a huge impact as well. We know our individuals who are transgender, or are having who are non-heterosexual, can often struggle in talking about that period with their parents, and that's in any case. And thus, there is a higher level of risk for violence, for teenage dating violence. We know that. So also I put that as kind of something to think about. All right, so how family values impact risk. I talked a little bit about traditional values and family structures. Hispanic and Latino families often prioritize close-knit familial relationships and respect for authority figures. And so it's do as I say. Communication patterns within Hispanic and Latino families. There's open communication about personal matters to a point. And often the open communication regarding relationships might be limited. There are just certain things that you do not ask, your parents about their relationship. It may be none of your business, depending on those communication patterns, according to your parents. They might not share that. And often there might not be open communication about sexual development and sexual behavior, or even what is expected. It's expected that everybody knows what's expected, even though we're not going to talk about what's expected because that's not appropriate, you know. Gender roles and expectations. I talked about that. Traditional gender roles may contribute to power imbalances within those relationships, which influence the prevalence and dynamic of dating relation of violence. And then the influence of cultural norms on relationship dynamics. Cultural norms regarding respect, honor, and family unity can affect how individuals navigate and respond to dating violence. Often within some families, ending up in a relationship where there is violence, it is seen as shameful to begin with. You should have known better. We told you not to date that person, or even we liked the guy, but you should have known this would happen. And so it's kind of that dual, we can't talk about these things, but you are expected to behave yourself. And so therefore, if you end up being sexually assaulted, you end up being in a situation that is harmful to you, you should have known better. And even in being in that, and I use this term, shameful situation, you have shamed the family, especially if we're looking at a rape that results in pregnancy. Now we have additional shame that you have brought to the family, which if you are working with that teenage dating violence victim, it can be very, very difficult to navigate those things because they're feeling it as well. They know the family values and they're feeling those things as well. And so it's just another element that we have to work with. So what are some of our warning signs? I mentioned earlier today in the presentation that many victims victims and individuals that harm do not know what it is, what dating violence is to begin with. And so often we are the professionals that are in charge of paying attention to the warning signs so that we can help them identify, hey, I'm worried for you. I'm concerned. This doesn't appear healthy. Do you want to talk about it? And opening up that communication. So some behavioral indicators. Number one, changes in mood and behavior. Abrupt shifts in mood, increased irritability, signs of depression may indicate the presence of dating violence. I have a female client that often, and she's really working on developing healthy relationships. And so right now she's, dating several different people. And I can usually tell by how she walks in the door how it went that week. And because this is one of her primary concerns, she really wants to have a healthy relationship. She witnessed domestic violence in her early family. Now she's a teenager trying to figure out what is a healthy relationship, and I don't want to repeat it. However, she's in the past, up until recently, has been dating individuals who are manipulative, who really follow specific gender norms of I'm the man, you're the female, and so we've been exploring what that means. But just having that, I can see the second she walks in the door, what kind of session we're going to have and kind of what happened that week. Additionally, behavioral indicators can be isolation from friends and family. Just that withdrawal. Again, often victims of sexual assault, victims of violence, even if it's psychological violence, they withdraw. Mainly because it can be the controlling behavior when they're in it, but also it's the guilt and the shame that I let this happen. I should have known better. And so whether we're in the midst of it right now, and if I keep talking to my friend, he doesn't want me to talk to that friend, or she says I shouldn't hang out with that person anymore. And so therefore I'm not going to call him back, in addition to, I can't share this with my parents. I can't share this with my siblings. I have no one I can trust because I'm still figuring it out. Because typically when someone's in the middle of a relationship like this, again, think of your domestic violence wheel. Within the domestic violence wheel, we have the individual is wonderful and sweet, and then participates in a violent event, or some sort of aggression or manipulation, and then is sorry about it, and is apologetic, and they'll never do it again. And then some time goes on, and then, we start the cycle over again, and they do it again, or controlling in some way. And so that sort of cycle, the individual is going, but he's so kind and nice, and I love him, and he's great. And then he hurts me, and it's harmful, and I don't feel good when he does that. but he's always apologized. And so we end up kind of with that cycle. And we see that with teenage dating violence again, and again, we're with our teenagers who may not who may not be able to process that with anyone. And then multiple instances of violence or manipulation. Dating violence can lead to long-lasting effects, potentially contributing to later intimate partner violence. I also work with adults. And often when I work with adults who have developed sexual addictions, problematic sexual behavior, both men and women, often it is because, you know what? I had a relationship when I was much younger, when I was a teenager, where I was harmed, where I was manipulated. I can't trust anybody. And so therefore they get into relationships which have that pattern. One thing I always tell my adults is you do not fall in love with what is healthy, you fall in love with what is familiar. And so, and we see this, and it's the greatest fear of victims. Once they see what's happening, it's the I'm gonna get with someone like my dad. I'm gonna get with somebody like that boyfriend that abused me. I can't pick good. There's something wrong with me. I keep picking the wrong guy. But when you look at it, it's like, no, you don't, you haven't received education. You've never learned this. During your phase of learning when you were a teenager of how to have a good relationship, you didn't learn everything you needed to, which is always, we can always fix that. We can always get more education and learn healthy behaviors. And that's one of the things that often our clients don't hear if they, A, don't recognize they were a victim, or B, can't talk about it due to the trauma. And within this, we have a lot of PTSD. I'm also an EMDR therapist, which I love, highly recommend when we're talking about trauma. That's a whole different, topic. But there's a lot of very, very good treatments for trauma and PTSD that often our individuals need to be able to get through some of that trauma and those trauma symptoms in order to get to the point where they can actually talk to us about what's happening. Of course, there can also be physical warning signs, unexplained injuries or bruises. And this, if you are working with somebody who may be experiencing this, this is kind of an obvious one. Frequent health complaints is also one when we're looking at, I've had clients that have been victims with irritable bowel syndrome, who have who just get sick all the time, and I'm seeing somebody who is generally healthy and all of a sudden always has these symptoms of cold, infection, etc. Our mental health impacts our physical health, both in how we take care of ourselves, but also in terms of just how we process, that can often, so we see individuals who it's like, man, you are sick a lot. And I start to look at what impact is the stress having on your immune system, and so often physical health is an indicator to me to let's explore this and just your levels of stress and where this stress is coming from, and we can get some information there. I had a question in the chat just about, do I find there's a sense of shame or failure for young Latin men when he gets someone pregnant? Thank you so much for bringing that up, because yes, often, we have, I work a lot with men as well as women, but I found many of the men, when we're looking at a pregnancy, in this case, because of the value of family within Latin communities, that value of family is very, very important. And so often, if somebody becomes pregnant, then there's that if they are a person that that it has a tendency to manipulate or otherwise harm, sometimes that's my baby, and if she decides, to have an abortion, she decides to do something I don't agree with, we have that lack of control, and I could do a whole nother thing on why people who harm. That's a whole nother, webinar here. But also there's that sense of loss. And especially with such a strong family value, that's my child, and yes, I'm 15, I'm 16, my girlfriend got pregnant, and I have to support that individual, I have to support that kid. That's my kid. But at the same time, you know, but I can't do anything, especially if, depending on what the intervention is, if they no longer see each other, if it's decided that, he shouldn't see the girlfriend, or just that sense of powerless and shame. This isn't something I was supposed to do, and so we have a lot of that. And often I always go back to our boys don't have the space to be able to express that, because especially as we're looking at our Latinx communities and we're talking about men's emotional expression, it's not cool. to show anything basically other than anger. If you're depressed, be angry. If you feel ashamed, feel angry. If you feel, stress, be angry. Angry for our men is often the only socially appropriate feeling, which in actuality is grief and shame and stress and everything that comes along with that. And so facilitating those conversations with our boys is just as important as facilitating it with our girls. But again, and this is it can be a very gendered culture as well, especially regarding expectations in relationships. And so we have to look at that in terms of our expectations of the parents and then what our teenagers are going through. All right. Academic warning signs, and so of course that is a huge thing. In terms of our academic warning signs, we can see decline in academic performance. So those of you that are in schools, this is a super important one. When our children all of a sudden, our adolescents, our kids in school, are otherwise, average, doing well in school, and we see a significant decline, we know something's going on. The only way to identify that is to ask and develop a therapeutic rapport, so that the individual feels comfortable talking to us. Often when I have a sense that there has been trauma, in my role, I provide psychosocial education on healthy boundaries, not because I think you have a bad relationship, just because we all need to know these things. I do a ton of that kind of education. I just think everybody should know about dating, relationship, and healthy boundaries. Not that I think you don't have healthy boundaries. I'm sure you and your boyfriend have fantastically healthy boundaries. I just like to tell everybody. And so, often I'm looking at getting in information about healthy relationships all the time to my adolescents because I know they care about that a lot. And I found that just about all the time, teenagers love talking about relationships, even if they're not talking about their own. But we see emotional distress, distractions, and also withdrawal from social activities, in terms of anything after school, things like that. And it can be because the abusive partner wants them all to themselves. Hey, track is taking too long, we can't hang out after school anymore. Or if it is just because they don't feel comfortable. When teenagers have a secret, often they stop talking to everybody because they have a secret. And so it's important to recognize that, that is there. One of the questions in the chat is how can we identify if changes in mood are caused from hormonal changes or dating violence? And the big thing is to ask. The best thing we can do is to develop a relationship and get comfortable with asking about relational topics with the people we're serving. And because often with hormonal changes, for some teenagers, you also have other signs, and you pay very, very close attention. You can see, just in terms of fluids, puffiness, acne, things like that. However, that's like, maybe you can do that. Some of our teenagers generally, they always have acne because they're teenagers, and there's always hormones. But at the same time, when we're looking at dating violence, look at the boundaries. What are healthy boundaries? That's really, really what we want to look at. We look at and even when we're looking at risk of teenage dating violence, I'm looking at a kid, I'm going, okay, what is this teenager's beliefs about what a healthy relationship is? Number one, I mentioned earlier, I have a female client who believes the healthy, she was talking for a long time that, well, the guy has to ask out the girl, no matter what. And where that's not harmful, I really started exploring with her what are the roles of men and women in a relationship. And she really, and this was part of just what she has seen, as we started, even though she's really working on having a healthy relationship, as we started to explore just that little bit itsy thing, a guy has to ask a girl, otherwise it's wrong. Okay, what else? And we started getting all of these different things where, well, girls are weak. Well, girls, can't do this. And all of a sudden I'm like, oh, we have some gender norms here, which because she is, she was a victim as a child of witnessing domestic violence, These things for her, kind of that gender disparity, they can be harmful for her, especially as she's, and she's wants to be a successful professional, but at the same time has all these gender roles that no one's ever clarified for her, and so when she's in a relationship, I'm watching how she interprets gender roles and healthy boundaries. And if she, how she feels. And again, we're looking at some of the other warning signs. Is she talking about the relationship to her friends? Is she talking about the relationship to her mom? Encouraging her to talk to her family about this new relationship if she's able to, And so those are some of the things, some of these warning signs can kind of help if it is hormones, our teenagers' hormones, or if it really is violence. All right. So when we look at some of the cultural barriers to reporting, concerns about community judgment. Obviously, victims might hesitate to report dating violence due to fear of social stigma and negative judgment because, as we know, people talk, and especially in very close-knit families, they're going to tell your aunt and they're going to tell your cousin, and everybody knows everything, because our family are our friends and our friends are our family, within the Latinx community. And we all know this. And so sometimes it's I can't tell my mom about my boyfriend because she's going to tell my aunt and they're going to tell my cousins, and then my cousin's going to get on my back, and I don't want to talk to everybody about it, And so they don't share. Fear of bringing shame out to the family. I talked about this one a little bit ago, of just that, I was harmed. I should have known better not to be there. I should have been able to stop it, but I didn't. And that's my fault. Reluctance to discuss private matters. It's just working with a teenager the other day he's in a group with other people, has been for a year. And he's like, I don't talk about my personal problems to people I don't know. I talk to my family about my personal problems, and that's it. And so, especially as we're looking at talking to me, who he's known for a year, but also talking to others, individuals that can help him, because in a relationship, well, yeah, I tell all my problems to my family, except my relational ones. And then I can't tell my personal problems to like my teacher or my counselor. So kind of stuck. And so this is where building trust and just acknowledging that it's hard to tell these things, but I'm here to help you in developing that relationship. And then, of course, pressure to maintain family harmony. You know, as we look at a familistic community, it's much different. I'm up north in the United States. We are very individualistic. Latinx communities very familial, and so it's our job to understand that what one person does, it affects the entire family. Some therapeutic approaches, I mentioned establishing trust and rapport. That is number one always for anything you do therapeutically. Encouraging open dialogue, being able to, and I just got to tell you that as somebody that worked with teens, being able to say the word sex without saying, hesitating, go practice in the bathroom or something. Teenagers are saying it all the time. They're very comfortable with the topic. They're only not comfortable because we're not comfortable, And so I try to use the correct words, and I won't say all of the body part words, I'll spare you. Being able to say the correct body part words, being able to say, does that hurt? Do you feel that you were hurt there? Being able to say the word sex, things like that in the relationship, without hesitation, you establish whether we're comfortable with the conversation. If you're not comfortable, they won't be comfortable either, And I found this because, believe me, I talked to teenagers about problematic sexual behavior. And literally after the first meeting, we say the word sex and all of the other sexual words without any hesitation. They can say them, but if they're uncomfortable, if you're uncomfortable. Involving family members in the therapeutic process, making sure that I'm always going to, let's develop a relationship with your mom so that we can talk to her about this, so we can talk about your relationship. And even working with the mom of, hey, it's important you don't tell Tia, everything she says. We need to have private boundaries as your daughter is learning or as your son is learning here. And then addressing cultural dynamics within the family, identifying what in this family, what are their family values regarding relationships? How do I help my teenager, my client teenager here align with those values so that we can work with them? Because our goal is not to change family values. Families have values because it works for that family. And so our goal is to help our teenager have her own personal values, or his own personal values, but also to be able to interact and have healthy relationships with their families. So additionally, we're providing, I mentioned empowerment and education. I provide a lot of psychosocial education. They remember, I've had children, have teenagers quote me to myself. I'm like, oh, you were paying attention. I thought you were sleeping over there with the hoodie on. They do listen 100%. And so providing the resources, talking about it, and this is where I tell you about our education, which is the fact sheet that we also have on our website, which I highly recommend that you take a look at. We got a fact sheet that you can look at all of the different citations and everything that I've said here. So I highly recommend that for resources. But there are a lot of other resources, and I'm going to give you some in a second here. Help them build self-esteem and resilience. Our teenagers are so amazing, but sometimes they can get themselves into relationships that are harmful. And it's our job to help them identify it and then work with them to problem solve. They do the problem solving to help themselves get out of that relationship. All right, I promised you resources. So here we go. So these are some, they're all national resources that are very, very good. I mentioned the National Domestic Violence Hotline. If you look at the hotline.org, it has a lot of resources, and I'm guaranteeing that it has the list of, how to know you're in a relationship. Additionally, Love is Respect. This is for young people. And so if you're looking for resources, you can leave slyly around the office so your teenagers will look at it, maybe, that has a great website. We also look at Break the Cycle, the National Resource Center on Domestic Violence. Of course, I put our own National Hispanic and Latino Mental Health Technology Transfer Center. That's us. We have a lot of training, and we have other trainings on similar topics that you might enjoy, especially regarding culture, because I could have gone on cultural values forever. So that can be helpful. And then also the CDC has Dating Matters, and it provides evidence-based strategies and resources for preventing teen dating violence, including online training for modules, because I know you like those because you're here, for educators, parents, other professionals, because that's also our job. I've talked a lot about working with our teenager. We have to work with the families, which means working with the parents as well to educate them on what is normal and how do you know if your teenager is in an unhealthy relationship. So hopefully those resources will be super helpful for you. And I know we will have this particular webinar available. We're recording it. And so you will be able to take a look and come back to it and hear it and cite these resources as needed. So, all right. So I think I've answered most of the questions in the Q&A. And so I'm going to open up to this. So this is your QR code for access to the fact sheet, which I wrote as well. And so that gives you all of the citations that I talked about, the basics, and so if you have colleagues that weren't here today, scan that code and you can give them access to kind of the cliff notes of this presentation today. All right. And then the last thing that you need, your opinion is super important to us. Let me tell you, this team here, they take your information and they are constantly creating new education based on what you tell us in this evaluation. So please scan this code with your smartphone. We will send a link in an email. And so in that link, it gives you access to the evaluation. And I got to tell you, they actually look at these. So these are super, super important, and it influences a lot of things, because when we put these out, your opinions can influence what we do for the nation. So make sure you submit those. All right. Did I miss anything? All right. If I didn't, thank you so much for attending today. It is 3:30 on the dot. So have a fantastic day. Thank you so much.